What if the plastic pollution crisis is closer to home than you realize? Have you ever considered who lives at ground zero of this environmental catastrophe? In this episode, we focus on the human impacts on vulnerable coastal communities located near the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. The plastic trash vortexes swirling in the oceans have serious consequences that ripple back to people on shore. Remote islands and economically disadvantaged regions are particularly hard hit by the garbage sent out to sea by more affluent nations. Let's voyage to the front lines of this epidemic to see how it threatens local ways of life. By listening to their voices, we can grasp how the global plastic crisis has a very real human cost. The most marginalized communities are often those most vulnerable to environmental threats not of their making. Developing Pacific islands and poorer Southeast Asian nations along the contaminated gyres rely heavily on fishing and tourism, sectors directly damaged by plastic pollution. In regions already struggling with poverty, the economic tolls of reducing fish stocks, marine dead zones, and littered beaches are profound. Many lack infrastructure for collecting and processing plastic waste, leaving no choice but to discard it improperly. They bear the harshest impacts of an environmental injustice fueled by overconsumption in the developed world. For island nations, plastics washing up on shore present an existential threat. Coastal communities in Fiji, Tonga, and Vanuatu have seen their beaches inundated with trash from across the sea. This compromises fisheries, tourism, and maritime activities essential to local livelihoods. With limited resources for cleanup and waste management, many islands have run out of space to securely dispose of mounting plastic debris. Uncontained, these leftovers of a global consumer economy leach toxins, breed disease vectors, and infiltrate fragile island ecosystems. Tavoa, a small island within Fiji, offers a poignant example. The once pristine paradise has been utterly overwhelmed by plastic trash arriving on its shores daily. Fishing nets snare coral reefs, while medical waste washes up from neighboring countries. The islanders lack any sanitary landfills, yet are drowning in the developed world's unwanted waste. For Fijian fisherman Levi Tora, the direct impacts of this imported plastic crisis are felt daily. His outrigger canoe often swerves to avoid floating debris, while his catches wane with declining fish stocks. Interviewed for a documentary, he laments being unable to protect his ancestral seas from this deluge of garbage fouling their waters. Levi's story represents millions in the Pacific, disproportionately harmed by plastic pollution they did not create. Developing nations without advanced waste management systems act as release valves for the excessive waste streaming from consumer lifestyles in rich nations. Already vulnerable communities become most exposed to plastic-contaminating soil and waters they rely upon for survival. The health and security of coastal villages are jeopardized by first-world convenience products made disposable by design. When the developed world converted to cheaper plastic packaging, little thought was given to how these materials might proliferate with reckless abandon in poorer regions. The economic externalities of this discarded waste have rippled back to those least equipped to absorb them. However remote their secluded islands may seem, no community remains insulated from the far-reaching impacts of plastic pollution. The resulting economic losses touch both fisheries and tourism that form the backbone of their local economies. In the Philippines, a nation heavily reliant on coastal resources, 80% of tourism revenues are generated by beach destinations and marine activities. These revenue sources are directly threatened by plastic debris littering once pristine shores. According to one estimate, curbing plastic pollution in the Philippines would increase annual fish catch by 30% and boost tourism revenues by at least 15%. Yet coastal communities lack resources to tackle a crisis they did not create, flowing from distant shores half a world away. Ground Zero stands far beyond the Great Pacific Garbage Patch itself, on frontline islands and coastlines battling this debris every day. Their shores accumulate waste exported from nations with little personal stake in the consequences. Local leadership voices are often excluded from the global discussions aimed at tackling the plastic problem. We must confront the stark power imbalance behind this environmental injustice and elevate voices from directly impacted communities. Their cultural traditions and livelihoods tied to regional seas face erasure under mountains of foreign plastic waste. If any solution is to prove viable, it must incorporate their urgent needs while addressing the root causes that selected these marginalized regions to bear the impacts of rampant consumer waste. Any true reckoning demands we first acknowledge the human costs of our global plastic addiction. The reverse supply chain of pollution ravaging vulnerable coastal villages also damages the consumers responsible. Ingestion of microplastics and plastic-borne toxins by fish and shellfish ultimately flow back up the food chain. Humans who benefit most from plastics are not immune from the widespread contamination they generate. Chemicals concentrate in animal fat and bioaccumulate up each link in the marine food web. The consequences circle back even to those who might believe their shores remain far removed. In many ways, this crisis connects us all. While frontline communities may face the most immediate consequences, plastic ingestion threatens seafood consumers worldwide. Any illusion the developed world is insulated from the downstream impacts of its waste will soon wash away. But those contributing the least to global plastic waste continue shouldering the heaviest burdens. The human costs of this epidemic are unevenly distributed, falling upon those most economically vulnerable. We cannot let their voices go unheard. The time has come to reflect on who truly pays the price at ground zero. How many more struggling communities must become the dumping ground for the developed world's excess before we change course? Subscribe and hit the like button to stand in solidarity with those most affected by the plastic crisis. In the next episode, we delve into the powerful industries that have perpetuated and profited from this global pollution epidemic. Don't miss episode 5, Big Plastic, the industries behind the crisis, as we pull back the curtain on those most responsible for the plastic proliferating in our oceans. See you next time.